Good morning, everyone, and hope you all are in very good health. Today, I want to talk about the microenvironmental strategic analysis using the industry attractiveness analysis framework. My name is Ali Reza Jalali, and I want to present this topic for you today. And hope you like this presentation. And I just started with the microenvironment of the industry. The microenvironment of the industry included the stakeholders of the company. The stakeholders of the company are the groups that affect directly on the company, and also the company affect the stakeholders. So the relationship between the company and the stakeholders is very important to increase the profitability of the organization and also the performance of the organization. Typically, industry include a rich mix of competitive strategy that company use in pursuing strategic competitiveness and above average return. So the strategy of the organization with their stakeholders is very important. Some of the stakeholders included the competitors of the organization and suppliers and also the customer. Porter models attempt to analyze the attractiveness of an industry by considering five forces within the market. Especially for those who like to establish the new business and they want to enter to the new market, it is very important to actually refer to the analyze the factor forces within the market. There are five forces within the market. First, the barrier to the entry and new entry threats, buyer bargaining power, supplier bargaining power, threats from the substitute, and the degree of rivalry of the competitors in the industry. First of all, I want to talk about the Porter's model. Historically, the organization just think about the direct competitors. They like to compete with the direct competitors, and in the past, it was enough for the industry. But nowadays, firms must search more broadly to identify current and potential competitors by identifying potential customers as well as the firm serving them. Degree of rivalry in the market in the Porter's model. In the center of the framework, we have the degree of rivalry in the market. This look at the number of competitors and their strengths in comparison to you. If rivalry is intense, companies have to offer lower price and provide incentives to attract customers. However, if the rivalry is not actually intense, the profit is generally high in the market. But what is important for the company that likes to enter to the new market is to find what factors influence competitive rivalry, which influence profitability. There are some factors affect the competitive rivalry in the market. First of all, the first factor and the first forces is the threats of the new entrants. Profits are like the magnet. What does it mean? It means that any organization like to join the market that the profit is very high. Usually, the company is looking for the market with the high profitability. So the profit works as a magnet. The higher the profit of the firms operating in an industry, the bigger the incentive for the new entrants. The firms that are currently competing in the market will lose some of their market share to new entrants. When the new entrants come, those who currently work must share their profit with the new entrants. It is important to assess the threat of the new entrants and come up with mechanisms that would prevent the entry of new competitors. Here, there are some strategies to prevent new entrants. For example, there are some barriers. Cost advantages. Cost advantages is one of the barriers for the new entrants. Low cost source of raw materials, government subsidies, access to the localized resources. Just assume two companies like Aramco, Saudi Aramco, and the BP. These two oil and gas companies, for example, in Saudi Arabia. Okay, the Saudi Aramco company in Saudi Arabia, usually supported by the government. There is a very good relationship between the government, Saudi government, and the Saudi Aramco company. So the Saudi Aramco company has the cost advantages. And it is very difficult for other companies to enter in this market, like the BP, because they are not supported by the government. Economy of scale is another barrier for the new entrants. It is very difficult for the new entrants to produce and to increase their capacity like the companies currently work in the industry. And this is the barrier, because whatever the industry can increase the capacity of the production capacity, they can decrease the cost and increase the profit. It is very difficult to compete with it is very difficult for the new entrants to compete with the companies currently working in the industry. And another barrier is the product differentiation. Just assume that Coca-Cola, that the product of the Coca-Cola perceived as differentiated by its client. It is very difficult for the new entrants to compete with Coca-Cola because usually the customers are really loyal to this brand. Another barrier is the access to the distribution channel. Just assume P&G is the detergent company, so produce the detergent products, and it is very difficult to replace a non-brand with P&G in the supermarket. And because the P&G invest a lot of for advertising in different distribution channels around the world, so very difficult this market for the new entrants to compete with this company. Government regulation is another barrier for the new entrants, especially in some industries like telecommunication, because the new entrants must get a license from the government, and it is very difficult to get a license from the government, and also is a big barrier for the new entrants to actually work in this industry. Threats of substitute products. In the context of Porter's model, a substitute is any other product or service that can satisfy the same need for a customer as an industry offering. So the substitute product has the very typical example, like for example tea and coffee. Tea and coffee are the substitute product, or for example the wine and the beer is the substitute product. There is a big difference between the rivals and also the substitutes. Usually rivals offer similar product or services and directly compete with one another. So, for example, just assume in the fast food, for example, McDonald's and also King Burger, they are the rivals, but they produce the same product. But substitutes usually produce the different product. For example, the McDonald's and the Tesco both prepare food for the customers, but the McDonald's prepare the food for the usually for the customers ready, but the food is ready. But Tesco, for example, prepare the food that usually the customer must prepare this food at home. Substitute are completely different product or services that consumers would be willing to use instead of the product they currently use. Threats of substitute product. Low threat of substitute product and high threats of substitute product. The low threat of substitute product, for example, the customer are unwilling to switch to the different product. Just assume the tobacco industry. Usually the customer in the tobacco industry, they are unwilling to switch to the different product, like for example, the electronic cigarette. And they usually like to use the real cigarette. High threat of substitute, for example, in the car use the oil, or for example, use the petrol. But there are so many substitute product. For example, the electric cars, or the hybrid cars, or the cars running on hydrogen. So there are so many substitute products in the market. So the high threat of the substitute product in this market is actually the threat of the substitute product is very high in this market, but in the tobacco industry, the threat of the substitute product is not very high because there is no any substitute product, and usually the customer are unwilling to switch to the different product. Here is another example from McDonald's and also the Kroger. McDonald's and the Kroger is usually they offer the substitute product and services to the customer. Usually McDonald's use different strategy to compete with the Kroger. For example, they prepare the ready food and salad for the customer, and the customer can prepare the food in the McDonald's even without getting out of their car. So it is very easy for the customer to use these kind of services. But if they want to prepare the food from the Kroger, it is actually it takes time for the customer to prepare the food at home. Usually this kind of a strategy is used by the companies to compete with each other.